Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Really grateful to Karimia Institute for bringing us together to talk about this really important topic. And British MINAB and Imams Online are partners in discussing and exploring the nature of Islamophobia in Britain and trying to eliminate hatred, including Islamophobia. The topic I've been given is nature and the definition of Islamophobia. So very briefly, in terms of the nature, Islamophobia refers to indiscriminate negative attitudes or emotion directed at Islam or Muslims. And I think that's really important, recognizing that it's directed at Islam or Muslims. That's what the Islamophobia definition, traditionally encompasses. And that's also has raised some issues and debate whether this is about protecting the faith, critique of the faith itself, or it's about actually protecting the individuals, that those who follow the faith. And we'll come on to talk about that increasingly, that now when Muslims talk about Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred, we are talking about protecting the prejudices, protecting the Muslim community itself, and the effectively how it impacts on their lives. And the speakers will obviously focus on the critique of the Islam itself, or how traditionally Islamophobia is referred to, has encapsulated the critique of the faith, and also other speakers focus on the Muslim community itself. So Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice effectively denies people's dignity, rights, and liberties. And as Bishop Toby earlier mentioned, that effectively the surveys upon surveys have shown that there is something that really unsettles the ordinary people about the faith itself and about the Muslim community. So Hope Not Hate, where I'm a trustee, in 2020 they published a report where they said 37% of Brits see Islam as a threat to the British way of life, and there are pervasive narratives in the media that portray Muslims as a security threat and or threat to our way of life being in speech marks. So as a result of that, there's obviously a number of factors that result in Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice, but you can see there are different factors that lead to that. And we saw that actually during coronavirus and the pandemic, that the hatred towards minorities, and in particular the Muslim community, went through the roof. And it was really ironic in the sense that actually we were all facing deaths and deaths, as well as huge impacts on livelihoods and lives. Yet, even during that period, we saw that actually there were hashtags like saying Corona Jihad and other things which really focused on the Muslim community. And Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group actually did a study along with Professor Imran Awan, where we actually highlighted how that increased during that period. Then in terms of manifestation of Islamophobia, there are a number of ways that Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice manifests itself. And I'd just like to highlight 4 of them. Firstly, it could be institutional or at an individual level, and it's the portrayal of Muslims, how Muslims are portrayed in the media or on social media or electronic media or otherwise. And secondly, it's the physical and verbal attacks and damage to property. When I say damage to property, it could be the mosque or Islamic center, or a property belonging to a Muslim. And then the third element is the implicit discrimination because of one's faith. And as Bishop Toby earlier mentioned, in terms of Nusgani, and we've all heard about how allegedly there's someone saying to her that effectively because of her Muslimness, the other colleagues were not comfortable with her being in that particular job. And finally, I think the manifestation of Islamophobia is absence of Muslim voices in politics, journalism, and culture and other places, and that could be due to a number of reasons. But the impact of Islamophobia is also tremendous. So some of the surveys have shown that the 3 out of 5 people 3 out of 5 Muslims have experienced anti-Muslim prejudice in one way or another. And it has a huge impact. For instance, I was speaking to one of my congregants, and she recently went to a supermarket and she was verbally abused in the supermarket. And as a result, it really created that anxiety and fear in her, and not only just her, but also the whole family. And now, she actually had to go through some counseling before she could go back to any supermarket. And so that's the one of the real impacts that Islamophobia has. So it's not just that, it's actually how it's impacting on people's lives. Now, and the government recognizes that there is actually huge rise in Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred. So the government's hate crime figures that come out year on year actually show that the majority of the religiously motivated hate crimes are focused on Muslims. And in the recent debate in the House of Lords in November 2021, Lord Greenhalgh actually commented on that and remarked that actually as a result of that, something needs to be done now. The government has set up anti-Muslim hatred working group, and that was set up 10 years ago. Lately, there hasn't been much engagement with that group, but so there are some steps that are being taken, but I think enough is not being done to tackle anti-Muslim hatred and anti-Muslim prejudice. Now that is effectively just laying out the nature of Islamophobia. That's how they're anti-Muslim hatred. Now we move on to having a definition. Now there's no universally accepted definition of the term. Some organizations prefer to use the terms anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Muslim racism, or anti-Muslim prejudice or intolerance towards Muslims. Effectively, so this is focusing on Muslims rather than actually the faith itself. Now, in a debate at Westminster Hall on 9th September 2021, an MP, Kristen Oswald, astutely said, "We cannot effectively deal with Islamophobia if we are not confident and others are not confident in what it means." So there's a real realization that a definition is required. Now, Runnymede Trust in 1997 coined this term Islamophobia. And I'm just going to read out from their report. They mentioned that Islamophobia refers to unfounded hostility towards Islam. It acknowledges that although the term is not ideal, but it's a shorthand way of referring to dread or hatred of Islam, and therefore to fear or dislike all or most Muslims. That's why they said in 1997. Now in 2017, in their 20th anniversary of the report, they slightly changed the definition to move on to anti-Muslim racism. And that's how I started off. I said that firstly, Islamophobia was in a way encapsulated and capture the faith itself, but also the community. But now increasingly we're seeing that when we talk about anti-Muslim sentiment, it's more about, at least in the political sphere, it's more about just protecting the identity and protecting people from being targeted because of their faith, and protecting their dignity and honor. Now, APPG in November 2018, APPG on British Muslims also published a report titled "Islamophobia Defined: The Inquiry into Working Definition of Islamophobia." Now, their definition has been widely accepted and adopted by most of the political parties and local authorities, but some have raised concern that there needs to be further debate how race and religious hate crimes intersect, because the focus of the APPG's definition on Islamophobia is about racism, it's rooted in racism, and also a key word is perceived Muslimness in there, which tries to capture that people who are perhaps not Muslim, but because they're perceived Muslim by others, and as a result, they're targeted because of that. And there have been a number of other attempts to define Islamophobia, including one in the Bradford Council of Mosques. They defined it as such that Islamophobia is a direct or indirect acts of hatred and discrimination against people, in brackets, individual groups of Islamic faith, on grounds of their belief and practice. So we can see that actually so far there isn't a kind of workable, practical definition that's been adopted by the Muslim community, but we all recognize the urgent need to do so. Now, you know, I was appointed in 2019 by the government to define Islamophobia. Sadly, 2 years on, not much work has been done because potentially there's lack of political will to define it. Therefore, resources haven't been invested in the work that's required. But effectively, I think it definitely when the work starts, it will not reinvent the wheel, but rather actually build on what's already out there. And so a definition of Islamophobia will focus on harm being experienced by Muslims in their daily lives. And it will not be a restriction on free speech or the ability to criticize the faith or prevent it, because that's been ongoing since its inception. And that's critically important, because I think some people really fear that having a definition of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim prejudice will curtail free speech. And that's not the case. And even the EPPG definition on Islamophobia, the report, they're very clear that no definition will try to restrict any form of free speech. And finally, I think any definition of Islamophobia will not undermine the work that's already been done to tackle extremism, because again, there are some sections of society that fear that any definition will undermine the work done on Islamophobia, done on extremism so far. So I think that in a way, I hope that the political will that we've seen to investigate the allegations made by Nusgani will be carried across to the work that was commissioned by the government or announced by the government in 2019 to define Islamophobia. And I hope that we soon have a definition of Islamophobia, which will help us to address and combat anti-Muslim prejudice that's increasing and reaching alarming levels in this country. Thank you.